Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Just Mental. I'm your host, Kendall, and today we have a really exciting episode for you. It was especially exciting for me as an athlete myself, as a retired athlete, as somebody looking for the next thing outside of sport. That can be an incredibly tough thing to have to do, and it almost challenges you mentally, physically, and emotionally, especially when you spend majority of your life up until a certain point playing sport, being part of a team. So today we have a guest. His name is Colton Burr, and we're going to be talking about all things transitioning from sport and at times the mental load that tends to carry with it. Let's get into the episode. The big thing of what we're talking about is kind of that sport aspect, how a lot of the times when you leave sport, there's a lot of uncertainty, mental health, not even necessarily depression and anxiety, but just this feeling of not really knowing what's next. And that can be really scary. So why don't you start by just telling me a bit about your childhood growing up, what your interests were, etc.
Sweet, yeah, for sure. So I grew up in I was all over. I was born in Regina, Saskatchewan, lived in Edmonton briefly, and then was raised mainly in Calgary. And it was for me like we were pretty middle class. We would our big vacations we would go camping for a weekend or for a long weekend. My dad ran a company out in Edmonton, so he was always kind of going back and forth between Calgary and Edmonton. My mother's a firefighter here in Calgary. So grew up again, yeah, just pretty middle class. We did lots of family things together. What kept me busy was just anything that I enjoyed doing, like anything I could have fun at. So whether it was camping and doing some quadding on the weekends, or it was playing sports. Any sport that I could play, I like to get into. I grew up playing mainly baseball, and then I transitioned to football around grade 9, and I had a fairly natural gift for it as well, including I enjoyed it and I worked hard. So I made some all-star teams right away my first year, and from there just kind of took it and ran with it. And it's been a lot of fun. So I went to the top high school in Alberta. Played for Notre Dame Pride. We didn't. It always I don't. It sounds like you're being boastful, but like I was there for 3 years and we didn't lose a game. The 3 years that I was there, so which is kind of cool to say. And then I looked at playing post secondary. For myself at the time, I just wasn't interested in going and playing at a university because I didn't want to go to university. That was I just you literally couldn't pay me to go. It wasn't going to happen. So I went and played for a junior team, played for the Calgary Colts, and that was exciting. We did some really good things there, won some big awards and some big titles. So it was good.
Say it was successful or as successful as you wanted it to be.
Yeah, I would say it was pretty successful. My first year with the Colts, I won rookie of the year for the team. I won. No, I did not get an All Canadian. I got a rookie All Star for the league that year. So I was a brand new rookie. I started my first year and played the whole year. And then my second year won an All Canadian. We did pretty good. We went to the semifinal for the national championship, and we lost to the Saskatoon Hilltops, which was super frustrating. Because then the following year, my third year, we went to the final again against them, the semifinal again against them, lost them again. But that was my third year in the league out of the 5 that you can play. And I had won the Defensive Player of the League award, another All Canadian. I was ranked number one across the league in Canada going into the following season. So it was, yeah, I'd say it was pretty successful. I worked hard. I made sure I made a good name for myself, and I think I was a pretty valuable player to the team.
Did you have any opportunities that came out of that success from that year?
Mm. There were some things in the works. There was so my coaches had talked about trying to get me on a practice team with the Stampeders the following summer, where you just go in and you practice with the guys, and it starts getting you familiar with the team, with the coaches, and just in kind of that professional setting. There were some universities that wanted to have a look at potentially bringing me over, but again, it wasn't really for me. Yeah, so there were things that were starting to brew, and then I could see where the path was going. Like I had the connections to be able to probably pursue a professional career, and was really excited about that. But for me, also that last season was when I had found what I do now. I found World Financial Group, and I had started part-time working in the industry. And so by the time I finished my last season, I had realized what the future could look like for me here versus, continuing to be an electrician or even pursuing a CFL career. And I just saw so much more here when it came to the potential and what could be that I ended up just kind of stopping with
Do you have
football, which
any
was
regrets? Athletes talk about all the time that they regret not necessarily pursuing certain opportunities and how that,
Mhm.
like, I have some myself. If I wouldn't have gotten injured, what would my life look like
Mhm.
now? All that kind of stuff. Obviously, not very productive to focus on, but do you have any regrets about not pursuing those opportunities?
I would say at the point that I'm at now, no, because like of course hindsight is 2020. Like you kind of see now where things are and how we're doing in business and what it's providing for our family versus what a career in the CFL would look like. Um, but of course along the way, like when you first make the jump, it's super scary and you think that you're going to regret a whole bunch of things. Like when I'd quit, I didn't talk to my coaches much in the off season, and then my fourth season came around. They're like, "Hey man, so are you coming to practice? What's going on?" And I had to go in and sit them down and say, "Hey, like guys, I'm done playing. Like it's not you guys. It's just I don't want to play anymore. I have something else I can put my passion and energy towards." And oh boy, it was not an easy conversation at all. They made it very persuasive. They were telling me they'd fly me out to all of our road games so I didn't have to miss work and all this stuff. Now who knows if they would actually have followed through with that, right? But but yeah, they were persuading me super hard to stay. And then I remember going for wings with my linebacker coach, Lucas Stavropoulos. I can never say his last name. Stav, we call him. Great guy. He coached me my whole 3 years at the Calgary Colts. I love him and his family. They're just such amazing people. But we sat down and he had a conversation. He's like, look, you got to understand that the decision you're making now might seem right, but I don't want you to look back in 10 years and be like, wow, you gave up another 3 to 4 years that you could have been playing football. Where, those when a lot of people look back, those are some of the best memories of their entire life is when they're playing organized sports, right? And so he just wanted to make sure that it was clear to me, like, hey man, you're not going, you're going to have the opportunity to work the rest of your life, but you're not going to have the opportunity to play football for the rest of your life. So whether you focus on going pro or you just play out the last of your time that you have, you got to really look and think about that. And the first couple years when I saw the guys that I had played with that were still playing, and you see the games come up. I never missed the 4 to 5 days a week of practice. I don't miss that at all. But you do miss like being in a game and making plays and celebrating. And I think when you're an athlete, you always want to win. Like when you're a high performing athlete, you always want to win, and you're envisioning what it's going to be like when you make this play or you make this interception, like what's going to happen. So it's hard to turn that off sometimes when you've stopped playing. But at some point you get to it where, hey, you know what? I've got other things to focus on now. And so I just changed my mentality from thinking about winning there to how do I win in business and for my family instead.
So obviously you were a very successful athlete. You were almost put on a pedestal, so to speak, with your performance and how good you were at what you were playing and all that kind of stuff. Do you feel like that affected your perception of who you were and what you could achieve just because of the success that you'd had with sport?
That is a really good question. That is a really good question. And it's it's such an interesting question actually, because I was super fortunate. My parents were always like very much so they could tell I was going to be a good athlete, right? Once high school started and we started doing really well. And my mom would always say, she'd always tell me, my parents were also super, super proud of me. But my mom would also tell me, now, hey, maybe she was bragging about me to other people, but she would tell me, she'd say, Colton, just make sure your head still fits in your helmet. Don't let your head get too big. Don't let your ego get inflated. Make sure you can still put your helmet on. And I really appreciated that, because going through your whole career, when everybody's telling you, hey, you're doing great, or you're this, you're that, all these things, it's easy to let that feed your ego. and yeah, make you feel like, okay, you're this special person. Um, and then that can have positive and negative effects. Like when it comes to the negative side, some guys get that praise and then they feel they can never live up to that, and it actually has kind of the reverse effect. They dial back and they start to um, like self-sabotage essentially because they don't think that they deserve it. For me, it works really well because I was like, hey, just thank you, I appreciate your praise, but we still got work to do. Still showing up early, still putting in all the hard work. But what I realized later in life, once I got into business, was it had a weird effect on me because once I started winning in business, I was always telling myself like, hey, stay humble. Don't let your head get too big. Don't let this. But there are points in your life where you have to kind of focus on you. Like you have to kind of tell yourself, hey, you're the shit. Go to work. Like do what you know you can do. And so there were times where I'd start winning and things would happen, and then I'd dial back my efforts because I'm telling myself, hey, just don't be cocky, remain humble, keep your head in your helmet. Um, but during those times, you should be doubling down on what you're doing and working a little bit harder. So it had an interesting effect later in life, but I'd say yeah, it didn't affect me in a negative way, but I see how it could, and I saw how it did affect some guys negatively, kind of being put on a pedestal or as the star player on a team.
Let's talk a bit about your career while you were playing at the Colts. So you mentioned that you're an electrician or you were an electrician. What was that like?
Um, the career itself or the doing them together?
The career and then balancing both and how that affected you physically and mentally.
That is a fantastic question, and I got a good story for that. So essentially, what was happening was I was playing football. So I was working 5 days a week as an electrician. I'd start at 7, so I was usually up at 5:30, get up, get ready, head to site, make sure I'm at site 30 to 45 minutes before my shift, and then just go to work. I'd work from 7 till usually 3 or 4, just depending on the day, and then I would head home. And when I was off season, it was great because hey, you're done by 3 or 4. You've got your whole day ahead of you still. It was fantastic. I loved being an electrician. Actually, it was really good. Um, but then when you were in season, now you're working full time. When you're playing junior, you're not CIS in Canada, so you're not playing at a university. When you're playing at a university, you're going to class all day and then you're going to practice. When you're playing junior, you don't have classes typically. So you're usually working a career and then going and playing practice or doing practice afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I was in season, I would finish at 3 or 4, and then we would have film at 5 o'clock. Film would start at 5, and we were practicing. If anybody that's listening knows Calgary, we were practicing out at Edge, so right out by Callaway Park, which is right
Jeez.
on the outskirts of the city. And I lived in Harvest Hills, which is far, like 40 minute drive if traffic is good. So basically, it was my routine was I would get home from work, and then I would either have time to eat dinner or have a quick nap, and then I would get in the car and I'd go to practice. And it started to wear you down after a while, and my mother could see it. She's like, "You're really running yourself thin." And then one day I was like, "Okay, well, I don't have time to nap and eat, so I'm gonna have some supper quick." And then I got in the car and I was driving, and actually I was about 5 minutes from the field. I was coming down the highway going under the old Banff Coast Road bridge, and I fell asleep for a second as I was driving. And I woke up and I was turned towards the wire barriers that are in the middle that divide the highway. I grabbed my steering wheel as fast as I could, but it took out the side mirror, my driver's side rear view mirror, where my doors met. It dented them in, and then it ripped off my whole back quarter panel of my car, um, which was very scary. that
Yeah, no
was
kidding.
that was a little wild. So that day I was a little shaken up and ended up not going to practice. I got there, told them what happened, and I went home. But yeah, like it's demanding. Being an athlete is very demanding, and if you're trying to most people, especially in Canada, you're not getting paid to be an athlete until you're at quite a high level, and you're not even some people, depending on the sport, even once you're at a high level, you're not getting paid extremely well. So a lot of athletes also have other careers, and it can be exhausting, right? I'm thankful at that time I didn't have a family, because if I did, like if I had kids or a spouse or something like that, like I don't know how you're supposed to juggle or do all that. To be honest, it's very demanding to try and do both.
For sure. And I think it's interesting that you bring up the pay side of things because men's sports is even just that much more. They get a lot more funding, they get a lot more attention in terms of news coverage
Mhm.
or perks or whatever you want to call it. But I was actually, when I went to the States down to play, it is shocking the difference between Canadian teams, even at a high school level, I should say, versus up here, where we get a bathroom to change in, they get a 5-star locker room with showers and cubbies. And
Yeah,
it's crazy when you look at it like that.
it is unbelievable. You look at most high school, like most high performing high school teams in the US usually have better stadiums and locker rooms than our professional football teams in Canada. And
Yes.
all of like the Div 1 universities blow every single professional stadium that we have in Canada out of the water. It's unbelievable. But that also comes down to when you look at just business in general, they pull in a lot more eyes, right? They attract a lot more attention. They get more fans purchasing gear, coming and purchasing concessions. So like it makes sense because there's way more people in the US. Like Canada only has 40 million people.
Right.
California alone has 40 million people in the US. So when there's that much more people, there's going to be that much more money to put towards those types of things if you can draw in that attention.
100%. 100%. Let's talk a bit about, so you were an electrician, you were balancing sport. How long after, well, I guess, when did you make the switch from working as an electrician to where you are now? And what was that decision like?
Good question. Good question. So how it worked for me, so I graduated high school in 2014, and then the spring and into the summer is when my first season with the Calgary Colts started, so the 2014-15 season. Um, so I was working as an electrician once I got out of high school. So again, I was working during the day, and then I would go to school, or sorry, go to practice. And then I did that for the first year, which was the 14-15 season. I did that for the following year, which was a 15-16 season. And then my third year, the football season starts in July, August for junior in Canada. And so I was working, and then I got introduced to World Financial Group in April of 2016. That's when I had got started. And I was just referred through a friend of my mother's, came in, I saw what we did, and I fell in love with it, with, you know, the fact that we could really help people in a major way. And then the fact that you could also, there's a team aspect to it. You could build a team, build a brokerage, and help other people win. Being a, I'm sure you've felt before too, like being a captain on a team, it's exciting when you get an award, but it's even better when you see somebody that you've helped get awards and succeed. And that's really a big part of what I love about what I do. But so I had started that in April 2016. So I was working there part-time, and then I was also working as an electrician part-time. And then I did that for a few months. And then by the time it was July, August that year when the football season was starting, I realized I couldn't do all three. I couldn't do electrical, football, and work WFG. It just wasn't going to happen. So I was not, my mother was not my biggest fan when I did this, but I went to my employer and I said, hey, look, I need 3 months off so I can just focus on football, because they didn't know I had kind of another thing going on the side. And so he was very upset with me. He kind of pulled me into his office one day, and my boss, he's like, hey, look, you've already had more than 2 weeks off this year. Nobody else gets this kind of time off. You should be sitting down and focusing on getting better as an electrician so you can take my job one day. And to give you some context, the man who was saying that, his office was downstairs in a utility room in a second level parkade under a building downtown, with pipes running through it and dirty and mice everywhere. It kind of rubbed me the wrong way, to be honest. It actually pissed me off, because I'm like, who the hell are you to tell me that I should be working my whole life so that I can have this? Like, I know my potential. I know what I can do. This is not what I want. I want so much more. Um, And maybe that's arrogant, whatever. I don't really care. I know the potential that I had. And so it kind of rubbed me the wrong way. But he said, yeah, sure. Take the 3 months off. I just might not have a job for you when you come back. I was like, okay, whatever. I'll deal with that in 3 months. So I quit electrical, and then I had started the football season. So I was doing World Financial Group during the day, and then I would go to football at about 5 or 6. Now it was a little bit tougher because in the nature of the work that I do, we sit down with families every day. So usually husband and wife, and help them make a good decision with their finances. Typically, you can't always meet with a husband and a wife during the day because one of them
Right.
or both of them are working. So you do a lot of work in the evenings. But my evenings I was spending playing football. So I still did okay. Like I still pretty much matched my full-time income as an electrician. But it was hard for me to progress while I was still playing so much football. So it provided me more flexibility during the day versus being an electrician. And then I was playing football. And then once the football season ended, it was my best year. I had a bunch of accolades. I was in actually one of the guys that I used to work with. He called me because he saw me in the newspaper. I got a little article written up on me, and it was good. Things were going really good. And then I got a call back from that same boss that called me, or that sat me down when I was asking him for time off. He said, "Hey Colton, look, are you coming back? Like, we know your season's done. Are you coming back?" And I just had to tell him, "No, I'm sorry. I appreciate everything you guys have done and the opportunity you've given me, but I found something else that I'm going to put my time towards." And that was that. And never spoke to him again. Um, which is crazy. And this is a total side tangent. And I want to make the point too, because his name was Jack, my general foreman, and really good guy. He was really nice, and I know I spoke got a little heated before, but he was a really nice guy. But it was scary to me because he had actually retired a couple years after we had that conversation, and 9 months into his retirement, he passed away of a heart attack. This was a guy who saved everything, did everything the right way, did like save, did everything how he was supposed to, and his life ended a little bit early, unfortunately.
How did that affect moving forward how you chose to live your life?
It helped me realize that you can do everything right, and sometimes things still just aren't going to work out. So if you have a dream, if you have a goal, if you have something that you want to go and pursue, just go for it. Like, don't wait because the timing is never going to be perfect to do it. And a lot of people don't do things because they're either scared of what people will say about it, or they're scared that they will fail at it. Typically, those two things stop people. But one, who gives a shit what people say? They're not going to pay your bills anyway. And two, if you fail, so what? Then you go back to life the exact same way it was, but at least you tried and you know that it didn't work out, versus never taking a shot, doing everything the right way, and life still not going the way that you want it to. So you might as well at least take a shot on your goals.
100%. I know you mentioned briefly that your mom wasn't a huge fan of you quitting or taking the sabbatical from your job, and I think that's a very
Yeah.
relatable thing, especially with our generation. Is I find that our generation is much more entrepreneurial. We're very much more in tune with setting boundaries with work and our personal lives, or at least we're more willing to stand up for those things. And I experienced a similar thing when I was going out on my own doing some freelancing work. My dad said, "Why don't you just go work for someone else and learn from them before you do this?" And similar to you, I was like, well, what's the point in that? Like, at least if I can learn on my own, there was just so much more value in doing things on my own in my mind. And it's such a funny thing because our parents' generation was not raised that way. It was, you grind it out, you stay in a job. My dad was like, "I never quit any job I ever worked at." And I was like, "But were you happy in any of those jobs?" Like, their idea of what a good life was much different, I feel like, than what ours is now. I don't know if you feel the same way.
I would definitely agree. And it's such an interesting topic because there's also a fine line that you don't want to cross. Like, so I find our parents' generation was very much so. Well, even if you can even go back, like if you go back to when the Industrial Revolution started, before the Industrial Revolution, most people were farmers, tradesmen. They had some kind of self-employment work. That's typically what they did. And then when the Industrial Revolution started, everybody left the fields and they went to work in factories. And essentially, the age or the conditioning of go to school, get a good job, get good grades, and then work at that job forever so that you can, go to school, get good grades, then get a good job, and work at that job until you get a pension, and the employer will take care of you. That mentality took over, and it took over for a really long time, probably until honestly like the last 10 years, last 10, 15 years, when our generation has really started to come up, and we've realized that one, employers are not loyal to employees anymore. That old saying of like, you be loyal to the company be loyal to you. That's a bunch of crap. That is very, very rare these days. If you get that, it's usually at a small company that's like a mom and pop owned company.
Right.
So that stuff's not true anymore. So I think what our generation has realized is like, why are we going to go and spend all this time and money on going to school so that we can get a job that doesn't even pay us as much as we took out in student loans, and then be unhappy doing that job and could be laid off at any point because there's no real security. Or at least that's what I kind of realized. So our generation has moved much more towards entrepreneurship, I think, which is good and bad. It's good because it allows us to innovate more, to do things that make us happy, to provide more value to the marketplace. But it can also be tough because, like your dad said, he never quit a job that he started. And I think a lot of people say that out of pride, like, hey, I'm a hard worker and I never quit, which is good. That's a good mentality to have. It doesn't matter what you do, you shouldn't be a quitter. So with you taking that mentality, but then putting it towards something that you want to do for yourself, that creates an incredible opportunity. But for a lot of people, they go and want to do something for themselves. And our generation is bad at this. They want to go do something for themselves, but they don't have the, hey, I'm not going to quit mentality. They have the, I'm going to do it and try it until I get too uncomfortable, and then I'm going to jump and try to do something else. And that's also super scary. That's a really bad mentality. And I think when most of our parents say that, that's what they're trying to protect us from, is us jumping from one thing to the next, to the next, to the next, and never actually making a true impact or decision on what we want to do. And then, hey, 10, 15 years goes by, and then our parents are like, oh, I told you so. You should have just stayed where you're at. But yeah, so you want to make sure that you're on the one side of that, not on the other.
Have you ever been told I told you so? Or have things worked out pretty well in the direction that you've been going?
Yeah, I hate being told I told you so. Like, if someone tells me I can't do it, I'm gonna do it almost just out of spite, to be like, hey, screw you, MFer, like I did it anyway. There's been a couple situations where, my mother hasn't exactly said I told you so, but she's like, hey, are you sure you want to keep doing this? Like, are you sure this is her like really nice way of saying I told you so? Because
Yeah.
my mom, although she didn't fully understand or maybe approve of what I was doing when it started, she always was supportive. She's like, look, I don't know if this is a good idea. Make sure you're thinking about this. But if you're going to do it anyway, I'm going to love you and I'm going to support you if I can. Right. So she's always very much been that way. But yeah, there's been a couple times where she's been like, I told you so, without saying I told you so. But when that happens, then I kick my ass into another gear and I'm like, okay, don't let that happen again. But there's been some people along the way that have wished they could say it. They'll look at me and say, I told you so. I told you that wasn't going to work. And I just made sure I worked hard enough that that person never got that opportunity to say that to me.
How has your mentality as an athlete? They talk about this. I mean, I think coaches talk about it more than student athletes do. But what has transferred from sport in terms of mentality to get you where you are today?
Very good question. So when you look at what it takes, it's kind of two parts to that question. When you look at what it takes to be good at sports, what are some key characteristics of the best athletes that you've ever played with or have seen play? Usually they're very disciplined, right? They got a crazy work ethic. They're very coachable. They're not egotistical. They're not like, hey, I know all. They're like, I don't know that much. Tell me, I want to learn. If I can get better, I want to get better. And they're dedicated. And they're usually leaders. They have leadership qualities. So if you take all of those, right, you take discipline, work ethic, coachability, dedication, and leadership. If you just take football out of the equation and plug in a business, real estate, owning a trades company, finance, starting a marketing agency, like you put those same characteristics into a person that is in business, they're going to do extremely well. Extremely well. Because the traits, it doesn't really matter what the environment is that you're putting the work into. Those traits, those human traits, are going to make you good at anything. And that's why you see a lot of athletes that are great at what they do go on to do great things afterwards, right? Like you look at Michael Jordan, who's the greatest basketball player that ever lived, in my opinion. I know I just saw all this stuff posted about LeBron breaking some record. I don't care. I still don't like LeBron. But greatest basketball player ever, and then went and became a billionaire after he was done playing. Like took all that competitive edge, those leadership qualities, the coach, took all of that, put it into business, and that's where he made way more money than he ever did playing. So it's pretty cool that way. Sorry, I forgot where I was going to go with the other point. What was the question again? Sorry.
The question was just what is transferred from sport into what you're doing now?
Yes. So those characteristics obviously have stuck with you because you learn that they're basically ingrained in you throughout your sporting career. And then you just take that and you plug it into business. And I think that's why athletes that transfer from sports to business typically have a little bit of a leg up over those that are just, that never played sports and now they're trying to get into business because they have to learn all those characteristics on their own. And they wouldn't have a coach that essentially had beat them into them earlier in their life. But that would be the other thing that I think transfers is, being coached and how it feels to be coached throughout your life. If you look at most athletes, when they get to the end of their career or the pinnacle of their career, they never look back and say, oh, I'm so glad that my coach made me do this drill or made me show up for this practice. What they look back at is, man, how did that coach make me feel as an individual? How did he care about me? How did they respect me? How did they push me when I needed to be pushed? Though that is what a coach really does. It's they develop you as a human being. They help you personally develop. And I think that when you transfer that over, that sticks with you into your next career, your business as well.
For sure. So you're a dad now.
Yeah.
Almost to 2. When's the second one coming?
The
Anytime?
due date is so today's February 8th. The due date is March 4th. So less than a month now.
That's crazy. I've heard that going from, I was actually just talking to my friend about this morning. She hasn't, I think he's 18 months old. And she's like, I can't even imagine going from 1 to 2 right now. And I've heard it's actually harder to go from 1 to 2 than it is to go from 0 to 1, which doesn't make any sense. But how are you? Let's talk about your first kid. How was it becoming a dad? Was it a big lifestyle adjustment? All that kind of stuff.
Yeah, for sure. So our situation was a little different. We didn't really, we weren't planning to have kids, but we weren't not planning to have kids. We were kind of at that point where, hey, if it happens, it happens. But
right.
It did happen a little bit earlier in life for us. So we found out, I was 21 when we found out we were having Blake. And then I was 22 when we had her. So becoming a dad at 22, I'd say I was a little bit fortunate because I was very mature for my age. Like I'd matured very early in life. But you're still trying to figure out who you are as an individual at 22. Like you're still learning about yourself. But now you have not just a child or a daughter to worry about and figure out, but also now you're working with your spouse. Because it goes from being, hey, two people that like each other. I'm not going to get into like the birds and the bees, but like two people that like each other, and you're kind of deciding like, do you want to live together this way? Do we want to live life this way? What things do you like in life? What things are important to me? To now you have a baby, that connects you. And no matter what, you need to make sure that you're doing the right thing for that child and ideally for each other. So you go from just trying to worry about yourself and figure yourself out to I got to figure myself out. I got to figure out how this person works and like to a high degree. And I got to make sure we keep a baby alive. And I got to figure out how to make an income. So it's crazy. it was crazy when we had Blake. The shit hit the fan for sure. But it also teaches you so much about yourself. Like you, especially being a dad, having a daughter. I think that it makes you really look at like, okay, what type of person do you want to be and what type of an example do you want to be for her? Where when she gets older, what does she look at as the example in her life? Are you being a lazy piece of crap? Are you not being a good spouse to her mom? Are you like these little things that are going to stick with her long term? So I
Right.
think as a dad to a daughter, you kind of have a higher level of expectation of what you need to live up to. It's still similar with a son, I would think, but I think it's just another level when you have a daughter. So that was quite the challenge. But to be honest, when we had the first one, our main goal was just, hey, can we were nervous, we were excited, but we were nervous because we're like, can we just keep this thing alive? Like, can we make sure that we don't mess up and we keep our daughter alive? That was the goal. And now that we're having our second, we're still exciting, still nervous, but it's more so it's not like, hey, can we keep them alive? We've done a pretty good job of that with Blake. But now it's like, okay, how do we juggle another ball? How do we just adjust life so that we can make sure Blake's taken care of, make sure the new baby Scarlett's taken care of, make sure ourselves are taken care of, and the household is run properly. So now it's more just a, hey, how do we fit it all into the schedule and operate a life properly? Nervousness, not a, are we really gonna disastrously mess this child up?
I think that's the point that you bring up about the financial side of things and the pressure. I'm assuming there was a type of pressure that you felt in order to provide, and typically with society the man is looked at as the provider. Was there some kind of, what was that pressure like and how did it affect you mentally? Was there a shift that happened? Was it difficult? What was the most challenging part?
Um, yes, a lot of pressure, a lot of pressure. And for me, I had by that time I had already quit my full time job as an electrician, so I was a full time business owner or entrepreneur in finance. So I was growing and running a business in the financial industry, and I was 22, so there's already a lot of hurdles you got to deal with at that point. The fact that I had more of a baby face than I do now, and you're trying to sit down and help 50 and 60-year-olds understand that you could help them with their pension properly. So there was already some hurdles, but now there was the hurdle of, hey, look, if you have a bad month, because we're a straight commission, right? If you have a bad month, it's not just you that might suffer, it's you, your spouse, and your child that can suffer. So the pressure went way up. And then there was also some conversations with people that were not very supportive in what I did, that said, hey, like you need to get your head out of your ass and you need to go get a 9 to 5 job to make sure that things are taken care
A
of no
real
matter what.
job?
A real job. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that comes down to a bit of our question earlier of some people that wanted to be able to say, I told you so. And I was like, you know what? I'm just not going to let you. I'm just going to make sure I work my ass off and do whatever needs to be done to make sure we're okay. And I can even remember back to there was a month where I was having a bad month and we had some bills and stuff that were coming up. And I'm like, you just got to do whatever you got to do. The number one rule of business is stay in business. So I got my sister, I went and got 2 shovels and we went and shoveled driveways for like 6 hours one night. And I think we made like $340, gave her some, kept the rest, paid the bill that was coming up. And I'm like, hey, all right, you just do what you got to do. You figure it out. You don't let your family suffer and you don't drown, but you just do what you got to do at the time you got to do it to make sure you can keep moving forward.
How
So
did
the
you
pressure was high.
how did you balance wanting to, I'm sure you wanted to be at home with your spouse, with your daughter, and now having a second child. How do you balance running and succeeding in business while also making sure that you're present for your family?
That is the golden question right there. And I don't think I've got the right answer for it. I don't think, to be honest, I don't think anybody's got the right answer for it, because there's no right answer. It's all based on the individual. You know, what's your when you look at trying to do everything, and this could be said from my perspective as the father, or this could also be from the perspective of the mother, right? There's two sides to all of this. But from my perspective, you look at, okay, how do you provide for your family and still be with your family at the same time? I think it's a myth that there is a perfect balance where you spend the same amount of time here and the same amount of time here and you get where you want to go. I think that it's more so, what's a good way to put this? You know what? It was explained to me one time like this, and I think it is a good explanation. It's like, when you go to the circus, if you ever been to the circus, where they have that little tiny stick and they're spinning plates on the stick,
Yes.
right? And then they get one going here, and then they get the next one and the next one, and they're spinning like 3 or 4 at once. That's kind of like life. You got to make sure you get your family situated. So you get the first plate spinning. Then you got to make sure that you and your spouse are on the same page. So that's the second plate. Okay, you got to make sure there's money coming in. So the third plate is your business. You got to, okay, make sure you get that one going. So I'd say it's just figuring out where you need to spend the most time at that time, right? There's times where it might not be super convenient, but you're going to have to spend extra time working on your career. You got to provide. That is what it is. You need food to eat, or sorry, you need money to buy food so you can eat.
Right.
But there's also going to be times where business doesn't matter at all. You need to be with your family right now, and you make sure that you're there for those times. And then there's going to be times where business is going pretty good and family's going pretty good, and you're kind of flowing like water. Like, you just spend time where you want to, when you want to. And those are the beautiful times where you can really just pick what you want to do, where you want to do. So that's the best way that I could describe it, really, is just, it's a balancing act, and you got to figure it out. And everybody's situation is a little bit different. Some people, I'd say the biggest thing that can help anybody that's listening to this with that topic is communication. If things are breaking down, if you and your spouse are fighting, or you're not getting things done at work, or whatever, just sit down and communicate with your spouse on what you both need and how you can be able to provide those things. Because the father does need to be at home for a certain amount of time. The father also does need to be at work for a certain amount of time. So you just need to communicate what is the most important for you and your family. The last thing I'd also just throw in there, I know this is kind of a long-winded answer, but I think it's a myth when people say, like, you're the father, if the father's the provider, if we're talking like a typical scenario, or whoever the provider is, right? Whatever. If the provider is not providing, the myth that they should be spending just as much time with the children is, I think, unrealistic. To expect somebody to go to work, provide, and build a lifestyle, and also spend just as much time with the children or helping out at home or this or that, is extremely, it's kind of ludicrous, to be honest. It's just not what it is. We all have different roles in life. We have to talk and figure out what roles are each other's, and we have to do those to the best of our ability, and then help and support each other with those roles when we can or when we need. That's what I would say about that, if that helps.
I do 100% agree. I think especially with our generation, and I mean, I can totally see where people are coming from, but there's this expectation again that men and women should be equal, so to speak, when it comes to everything in life. And a lot of the times, like, I can understand if both partners are providing the same amount of income, or one's providing more than the other, but there's almost this unsaid expectation that, like you just said, if you work for 12 hours a day and you're the main provider in your house, you're then in some instances expected to come home, clean the whole house, make sure things are good there too, where as traditionally it's not like that. There's different roles, there's different things to be said. And I think that's a very controversial way that society looks at things now, which is really weird because that's not how it ever was. But yeah, I think men and women, they do have different roles. And it's just a matter of, like you said, just communicating with those to understand what they are more specifically.
Mm. Yeah, that's the biggest thing. When things start breaking down in a household, it's usually due to a lack of communication somewhere, somehow.
Right. So one last question before we wrap it up. I'm sure this isn't the career that you're in now. Was it what you had envisioned when you were in high school playing football, succeeding in that? And what
Yeah,
advice would you give to that younger version of yourself?
that's a good question. Yeah, that was what I do now is the far thing. I grew up my whole life around trades. That's my father has run an ironworking company since I was a kid. My mom used to do that, and then she went and became a firefighter. So like getting your hands dirty and going to work was basically all that I knew. Since I was 13, 14, every summer I would go and work with my dad in the trades. So it was kind of beaten into me. So thinking about, going from I'm a tradesperson and I'm a football player, so I'm a bit of a meathead, and I'll be totally honest. Um, to thinking, okay, I'm going to go from, working in trades and wearing Carhartts and picking up tools every day to I'm going to wear a suit every day and I'm going to be dealing with numbers. If you had told me that, 9 years ago, oh my God, I would have told you were crazy, absolutely crazy. But I think looking back now, if I could give that, Colton in high school, give him some advice, I would just say I was pretty open to trying new things. So I wouldn't tell myself to be more open because I was pretty open. I would tell the average person, be more open to trying new things because you just never know until you try something. Um, but I would say be comfortable failing faster. Be comfortable like going and trying and making a total ass of yourself and then learning and figuring it out and getting better faster. Because I still do that, but I wish I did it faster earlier in my career. I wish I had been not so scared to fail and I'd worked a little bit harder and done things sooner so that I could fail more often and learn faster and get to where I want to go sooner.
And I think we're in a little bit of a different situation. You have a house, you have kids, you have a family now. But speaking to somebody, let's say in their really early 20s, that's just coming into their career,
Mm,
realistically, you don't have a lot to lose necessarily in terms of, I mean, in the grand scheme of things, you probably don't have, unless you, well, at that point, you probably haven't gone to school for very long. You don't have a lot of debt. Um, so with that in mind, what piece of advice, I guess, would you give somebody who maybe has this dream? It feels a little bit out of reach, but they're in a position where, and I would think it's a bit of a privileged position where they have that ability to fail.
mm. Yes, yes, that's a huge point you bring up there, Kendall. It's keep if you have the opportunity to, when you're young, still live at home, keep your expenses super low, you need to focus on delaying that gratification that you want. Because even like society these days is we're so like we want to win now, we want this now, we want a car now, we want to flex on our friends or show this or post a picture of this. Just listen, put all that shit to the side for a little bit. Put your ego to the side and realize that you don't have to have the flashy stuff. You don't need to show this. Keep your expenses as low as you possibly can. And while you're living at home, if you still are, that's a great time to do it because your expenses are typically extremely low. You don't have a mortgage or rent payment. You're not paying for all your own food or all this stuff, right? Keep those expenses as low as possible. Go and work as hard as you possibly can. And when you start seeing the results, save it. Save the money or reinvest it. Either save the money so you're building your net worth because cash flow is one thing. You can go do anything and earn cash flow, like do things that are going to make you income on a monthly basis. People talk about cash flow as king. That's cool. I don't want to be a king. You want to build your net worth, which is what's going to grow you a kingdom. So save your money and build your net worth, or if you need to, take that money and reinvest it back into your business or whatever you're doing so that you can grow faster and scale faster. That's what I would be doing. If your expenses are low and you're just getting started, work on building your net worth from a very young age or reinvesting into your business so that you can grow faster. Don't worry about the flashy shit. It's going to come. If you're 25, you don't need to be driving a freaking Lamborghini. If you can and you can actually afford it, cool, go ahead. But you're going to get a lot further if you just wait a little bit and go get those things when you're 30, 35, right? You're going to get yourself in a much better position.
Would you say that you're happy with the way that your life has turned out?
It's a good question. I ask myself that all the time. I'm a very happy person. I've always, you can ask anyone who's grown up with me, I've always just been that way. I love life. I love being alive. I like having fun wherever I can. And I turn almost everything that I can into some kind of a game, because I think life is a game. I think you're playing, you don't win. You just have as much fun as you can along the way. There's going to be days that are really stressful and really hard, where you're asking God, like, hey, just help me get through this situation. But there's also going to be days where you don't think anything bad can even happen to you. You think it's impossible. Those days come and go. Just focus on being a happy individual, being grateful for what you have. I think if you can really focus and start your day with being like, hey, I'm grateful I got air in my lungs today. I'm grateful I got out of bed on my own 2 feet. I'm grateful my daughter's not in the hospital. I'm grateful that our new baby on the way just had a checkup and both Haley and the baby are doing good. That keeps you grounded and keeps you positive about life, no matter what's going on. Just anchor yourself in some gratitude, and it's easy to be a happy person and have a happy life.
I love that. I think that's fantastic. There's not enough kindness or positivity in the world, I don't think. So we could
Agreed.
definitely use more of that for sure. Well,
And the best way to do that is just be that person. Be that person.
yes.
When you go out, you see people that are having a down day, just do one little thing that can make that person's day. Smile at them, tell them, hey, you got some nice shoes. Hey, hope you're having a great day. Hey, let me help you with that. If you can try to make one person's day every day, man, you're going to live such an amazing life. Such an amazing life.